Hello and welcome to Veeam 2024. I'm Rick Vanover, the Rickatron, and in this online short bite session, I'm going to give you an overview of the Veeam Hardened Repository. This is a very easy way that you can have immutable backups on disk with no additional Veeam cost. Let's take a look at a demo right now. Now, if you're familiar with Veeam, you know about the backup repositories. Backup repositories are where Veeam backups go. And I have several different repositories, and 3 of them are listed as hardened. That means they're running the Veeam Hardened Repository, and more importantly, they're using the single-use credential. Now, before I get in and show you a little bit about how that works, I want to draw your attention to a handful of websites. Let's start off first at Help Center, the Veeam product documentation. There's a dedicated section on the Hardened repository. I highly recommend that you check this out. I'm using Ubuntu in my lab, and a lot of the documentation is going to go over Ubuntu as an example, but a number of different Linux distros are supported. I also want to draw your attention to this sys document, sys 507. If you want to have an open source hardened Linux repository with additional hardening to specifically the disastig specification, we have this documented here. And this is a really powerful way to remove some of the additional surface footprint risk of a Linux system. And I can't talk about the Linux hardened repository without mentioning Hannes, who has done an incredible amount of content on the Veeam blog about the hardened repo. So if you're on a journey to learn more about it, really recommend checking out some of the different content here. And again, Hannes is in the product management team, fantastic information. So definitely check that out. Okay, so here we are, and I want to first explain how you add a hardened repository, but I want to show you a lab trick. So this is a lab, but I want to look at this system right here. RVVHR04. So I'm going to do a little trick here. So I'm going to get its IP. I don't remember what it is. Now this particular system is already inventoried, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. But I want to just take this IP because that is what I need. So if I want to add a hardened repository, so I have to have a Linux system made, I want to walk you through a couple of important steps. So categorically, the hardened Linux repository is direct attached storage. So I'm going to click that. And I want to draw your attention to a relatively new option here of a specific window for the hardened repo. Let's go ahead and click that. Now, you can make the option, the names, all of that, but the most important part of that is when you add a new Linux system. I'm going to put in that IP. The most important part is this notion of a single-use credential. Now, the good news is when you build it this way, it will add it only with the single-use credential. And I highly recommend you do that because the Veeam server doesn't have a persistent connection or storage of those credentials on it, right? It's pushing the services out that one time, the single use, and then the VHR, the Veeam Hardened Repository, will communicate back to the Veeam server. So I'm going to cancel that. I just wanted to show you that. And I'm going to walk through this one that's already set up. Once you add that single-use credential, you have a name, you'll have the server. This is that Linux server that I've got. The repository is the path. Okay, so this is the file system. So it's /VHR. And you'll notice here that make backups immutable for 7 days. That's the default. And in this environment, it's also the minimum. Keep that in mind, a minimum of 7 days. And you have the normal repository options. Now, what I want to show you is what this looks like in Linux. Now, I am going to be using the PuTTY SSH, but for hardened environments, and then also if you're using the Veeam Hardened Repository onwards, you don't need SSH, just makes it effective for me to show you. So let's start with the working directory that I'm in. So I am in that /VHR directory, which is where I have the backups. And then let's take a look here. I have in here a backup job called VHR one timer. So I've made a backup of immutable Veeam image-based backups. I want to show those to you. So I'm not a Linux guru, but I do know that if you type and hit tab, it'll take you there. So in here, let me give you a better view. I have made a kind of a specific set of data. Now you remember it said 7 days immutable. Now I am recording this on 11th March here, so let me change the color. You'll see that this metadata file right here is marked today. This file right here is marked into February, right? So that is outside of the 7 days immutable. And then I have two other files down here. And if you're familiar with Veeam, you'll know that VBK is a full backup and VIB is an increment. So sorry about all the coloring, but you'll just get what I'm saying, that there's 4 files in here. Now let me show you what's interesting here. So if I'm going to take a look at the attributes, what you'll see here is very interesting as well. So you'll see that the 2 files are immutable and 2 files are not. Now, why, oh, why would that be? Well, the reality is that the immutable files are the most recent ones. Let me do it this way. Okay, so if you look at the 2 that are super recent from the day I'm recording here, March 11th, and then these 2 are marked as immutable because they are less than 7 days away. But if you look at this one right here, this one's beyond 7 days, so the file ends in F930. That one is not marked as immutable so that command is to list attributes, and F930 does not have the immutable attribute. And then a lot of people also ask me, well, what about the metadata files that need to be immutable? And the reality is no, because the full backup and the image-based backups marked as immutable would maintain a chain of integrity there. The metadata helps on import, but the reality is you don't need the metadata. And also the metadata file has to change on incremental backup runs. So we really can't mark the metadata file as immutable. So that's a quick look just in Linux. And again, it sits in here like any other regular repository. And the one thing I want to draw your attention to also is what it looks like in Veeam 1, which is part of the Veeam data platform. The repositories that you have will be listed in line here, and basically it'll be right here, Linux hardened with the immutability term. And kind of the last thing I want to highlight about this is looking at some of the alarms. So over in Veeam 1, it's really important to have certain alarms do things that we care about. So let's go into the Veeam set of alarms. And, you know, I'll be the first to tell you, there's a lot of stuff in Veeam 1. But these 2 alarms, these are really important. I would highly recommend having these 2 alarms. Email you, the admin, email the security team, because really nobody should be messing with these. You know, one of the things threat actors like to do is turn off immutability, shorten the immutability. Now the Veeam Hardened Repository has a minimum of 7, but this is something that if anybody's tampering with it, we want to know about it. So that's a quick look at the Hardened Repository, and there's a lot of information over at veeam.com about it. And I think that if you're looking for an additional immutable copy, and nowadays I'm fine to recommend 2 copies, the Hardened Repository is something to consider. I hope you enjoyed this Veeam short bite about the Veeam Hardened Repository, which is a very easy way to get yet another immutable copy of Veeam data with no additional Veeam cost. Enjoy the rest of Veeam.